All right, so we already kind of alluded to this topic, but Sebastien Foucan came out first on his own Instagram, and it's a video that actually doesn't have a ton of views yet, and it was Instagram Live. I actually downloaded it to my phone because this kind of stuff that he started to talk about here, I got the vibe that he's gonna want to take this stuff down. That was like the vibe because he's talking about the history of parkour, some of the lies, and which kind of sounds like a strong word, but or myths
around
the history of parkour. And I just thought, okay, there's no way he's going to keep this up, so I need to download this so that it's saved, so that we have it. But then he goes on the Modus podcast and
That's the name of it. Modus Podcast.
Interesting choice. I don't get it.
This is the Modus Projects, Modus Podcasts. I don't know. It's kind of like a play on words or so.
So anyways, goes on the Modus podcast and basically tells the whole story again.
Yeah.
Very, very publicly on a more public platform with Giles and Keelan, and gets into the history of parkour, gets into the naming of it. And I just want to know, first off, like what was your biggest takeaway from the whole thing? It's like a 3-hour talk, so there's a lot.
Okay. Yeah. So let me just start by when I watched the live, it actually kind of messed me up a little bit, because mentally, I was kind of messed up from it, because I mean, this is the actions of that Sebastien and the early practitioners took in the beginning have fundamentally shaped my life in such a profound way that I have these myths and these stories about what the history was like, and he kind of changed that a little bit when he went on the Instagram Live. And so my biggest takeaway is just nothing is as it seems, and there's so many holes in the story that we just never were told. And so it's so refreshing to have him come on and try to fill some of these holes. And he talks about it as talking about his story. So it's, because his story is different from David's story, is different from anybody else in the Yamakasi or other early practitioners. So my biggest takeaway is there's still so many holes to be filled, and there's still so much question about it. But even more importantly is or actually maybe not more importantly, but another takeaway I had was the naming schemes, and the cool takeaway for me was that the original name was Parkour with a C and an S. Parcours. That was the original name that they all called it, according to Sebastien and his perspective. That's what it was called.
And just real quick, because he talks about this in his Instagram video, but they don't really touch on it in the Modus podcast. At least I don't remember.
Right.
Is where that word came from is the Parcours du combattant, which is from the natural method.
Yeah.
Which isn't new information for us. Might be new information for you watching this, but that's kind of something known, is that the word parkour is not a real word in French, and that it was taken from that.
Yeah. From Parcours du combattant, which means just literally the path of the warrior. And that was the French military obstacle courses that they did. And that was taken from, inspired by Méthode Naturelle, or the natural method, from Georges Hébert. And that's where Sebastien and some of these guys, they went to the library, because there was no internet. They went to the library to check out the natural method books, and they're in it, there was they would try to copy what was being done there. So it's the origin of parkour is a bunch of teenagers, kids, going looking at these historical movement methods and being this looks cool and fun, let's do this. And I'm clearly simplifying it, but it's so much more, obviously so much more to that. But But yeah, I found it really interesting, and each person kind of contributed in their own way. Like Sebastien was a very playful person, and so he was very play oriented in the way he practiced. But then like David was like the mentally strong guy who was like, I'm gonna do this, and be strong about it. And then Jan was another guy early on. He was like, I'm gonna, I think we need to train. We need to do repetitions. So like over and over and over and over and over. And so like everyone kind of contributed in their own way, but then it caused like nobody recognized each other's contributions, and that's what kind of caused all these splits and things like that. So
the name Parkour with a C is something that he repeats a number of times.
Yeah.
Because, and again, like this is the new part. So again, the part of like where some of the ideas for parkour came from and what inspired the word, that's all been talked about before. But the new part, or at least new for us, is that they were using parkour with a C.
Yeah.
For quite a long time.
To the point where Sebastien has he made the very first parkour logo, and it says parkour with a C and an S, and that's like the logo. And then later on, using the same style of logo, he changed it to make it say Yamakaze, which was then a group of people who are practicing parkour, or what they eventually started calling l'art de placement, which means the art of movement, essentially. Or a lot of people just call it ADD for short. And that's, to this day, many of the Yamakaze refer to it as ADD. Whereas David then kind of went back to the root but changed the way the spelling was to call it parkour. And then
Sebastien gets into his thing that he now just kind of apologizes for is free running. And it's funny because free running, when I started parkour, the argument that was always made, and when I say I started parkour, this is 03, 04, the argument that was always made is that free running is parkour plus freestyle plus, so that includes flips, spins, tricks, things that are not efficient, things that don't necessarily get you from A to B, which was not actually his intention.
No, his intention was more just we're speaking for him in a sense, but early on when free running was coined, that term, it was he always presented it as free running is following your way. And then free runners, people who do flips and things like that, always took that as free running is anything. It's kind of whatever I want to do. And in a sense, it's they interpreted it the right way, because they started, instead of getting bogged down with definitions of that's not parkour because you did a flip, they're just whatever, I'm doing free running, I'm following my own way. Mm-hmm. But I did find it very interesting that he almost regrets it. He almost
it comes off as an apology, particularly because I think he says sorry on the Modus podcast. Yeah. He says sorry, I messed it up, and it's you kind of did. You because this is still one of the biggest debates in the world of, I have to say, what we do. I would like to say the world of parkour, but some people would take issue with that. That's a shrinking minority.
Yeah.
Thank God. But it's a big problem with just trying to spread parkour and trying to get it out there. It's there's 2-3 names that we're going by, and it if you're trying to, it would just be so much easier if it was all I'll take another sport, it's soccer and football. Well, they all kind of end up being the same sort of thing, but you can kind of say soccer anywhere and someone gets it. It's you should be able to say parkour anywhere, and someone shouldn't say oh, you mean free running, or or what's the difference or whatever. And it's
I've always struggled. I've always been annoyed by you go to a lot of people's Instagram bios and it says parkour and free running, or I'm a professional parkour and free running athlete, and it's are you doing two different things, or is this really one thing that you're doing that you're just calling two different things whenever it's appropriate, whenever you think it's appropriate to call it the other thing? I always found that super weird, and I'm actually in my own practice, very much a traditional parkour person. I don't do a ton of flips. I do some flips, and not all of my movement is around doing like efficient A to B movement. A lot of the time I'm doing more aesthetic movement or just fun challenge-based stuff. But I think there's room in the parkour umbrella for all of those things. And I think the distinction could be made, which has already been made, by, calling things like, style parkour. It's still parkour, but it's under the style umbrella, the smaller umbrella. So, yeah. So the naming conventions, so names in parkour have been the most annoying and frustrating thing to deal with. I mean, even down to the names of the moves. Like we have Kong, or it could be cat pass, but we also have cat leap. No, but that's actually arm jump. But what's a lâché? A lâché, I think we should call lâchés arm jumps.
Yeah, it makes more sense.
It's more of an arm jump than an arm jump is.
I think there's like such a resistance with naming conventions too. Like where I just wish people would, I don't know, I guess I'm a pretty stubborn individual, but it's like there's a stubbornness around a lot of things that you could look at, okay, what's the greater term being used and why does it make sense and why is it okay? Like, again, Kong and cat pass. And there's this weird thing where, like, when you hear a lot of British practitioners who don't like the word Kong, they talk about it as like, oh, it's related to like urban free flow or EZ, and it has like that sort of context. And I wonder if why that's like there's more resistance because it's something that they hate about the past. Whereas you do have a bunch of like younger British practitioners that say Kong.
Yeah.
And it also sometimes slips in there, like people that predominantly use cat pass, they slip Kong in there into depending on what the combination of moves is.
Yeah, well,
and then
like,
it gets more confusing.
So yeah, I mean, like Team Fat uses Kong, and then even like recently Project Underground, they were using the term, like they were using some like of the new age terms and some of the old terms, and I wonder if it's going to continue moving towards new age terms because as younger practitioners are coming up in the sport, they're learning the new age.
Just to say like what you're referring to is they say arm jump, they say cat pass, but then when I say they, I mean whoever was posting the challenges for Nova City Project Underground, and then they say pole cat.
Yeah.
So it's pole cat, which is what we would say like the cat leap position or cat hang, and then there is arm jump, which is the same thing but using a different but they don't
on a wall.
But they don't say pole arm jump.
No. Yeah.
Or pole arm. It's because it sounds silly to me. But, and then there is cat pass, right? Which is what we would say Kong.
But even people who are very hard line, like it's called cat pass, they'll still call it a Kong gainer. So it's like, I don't know. Anyway, we can go on for a long time.
This is a whole other topic and everything.
But I guess kind of coming back to the history of it. So Seb coined the term free running, and that's kind of like became his thing. Even though he was probably still just doing the same thing he had always been doing, which was parkour.
That's what he says. That's what he admits to. He's like, he didn't change what he was doing. It was more just like disassociating himself with the other guys that he had come up with that he was no longer close with.
Yeah. The funniest thing in my head about this whole thing was that the founder of free running has said that he's not actually a big fan of the freestyle competitions. Mm-hmm. So like he's super into tag. So like he's really into world chase tag and tag based competition. But he said he's interested in speed. He really likes speed because it's so raw and like it has a lot of the elements of the early parkour mindset. And then also like skill, he thinks is really cool because I don't know, he didn't really go into depth of why he thinks it's cool, but he thinks it's cool. But he said he's like, the flips, not so much. But the founder of free running doesn't like free running competitions. What do you think about that?
It's like we're kind of like laughing about it and saying it's funny, but I also kind of feel like if you if you are a free runner, freestyle parkour athlete, well, he's always mouthfuls.
Yep.
I mean, we do need to eventually just switch to parkourist, but anyways, if that defines you, and you also as part of that looked up to Sebastien Foucan, and that's part of your story, this has got to sting a little bit.
Yeah, I could see that.
I think this has got to be a bit of it, because even when they were talking about the things done on the manpower gap, and he's just kind of like, he's not really interested in like seeing the sport push that way, blah blah blah, you know. But then he does say things that, you know, his favorite athletes over time, both of them, Daniel Labaca and it was Chase Armitage he's referring to. He says he goes just by Chase, but Daniel Labaca and Chase Armitage were like his favorite like athletes that kind of like change things, and they're both like very heavily like freestyle practitioners. So
that's true, but they also, especially Danny, had a very solid foundation. He could do everything basically. So,
both of them.
Yeah. I mean, I would say Danny even more than Chase, but still, Chase was like also a very well-rounded athlete. But I guess the reason I find it funny is because I've for a long time been against the term free running. I just think it is a poor descriptive term for what we do. It's probably better if we're looking at like what was Seb doing. Free running sounds more like, like the way that Seb moves. Okay, yeah, he's moving freely. He's doing a lot of basic, you know, parkour stuff. He's jumping and stuff like that. But what free running became is like trick-based movement of like flips and spins and freestyle lines, and I feel like a lot of the time freestyle lines turn into a weird showcase. Not that I'm not trying to downplay it at all. It's like I really love the way that people are pushing, using their bodies and using the environment and mixing those two things, because that's what makes our sport so unique. But I find I find free running, the term, a very poor descriptor of what people are doing, because there's very little running that happens. It might be free, but it's definitely not doing a lot of running. It's a lot of like plyometric, like flipping and swinging off bars and like pushing off of walls, or, you know, stepping on walls. I don't know. So,
if we're talking about like the English language, running free sounds a lot more like parkour.
Yeah.
Just in terms of like, if you told someone like I do free running, and you just had to like picture, like close your eyes and picture what does free running look like, those two words together. It's like it's either something like very strange, free running.
So years ago, I was in a commercial for it was like a NASCAR commercial or something, but I was chasing like these skaters, and the director came up to me and he's like, "Oh yeah, man, I hate it when like there's a chase scene and somebody does a flip, whatever, you know, like that parkour stuff. Like, no, like it's the free running that really like."
So he had it backwards.
No, he had it backwards, and I had to just kind of like, yeah, I understand what you're saying. I know what you're saying, but I didn't want to correct him. Like, it's not, that wasn't my place to do it. But it was just more like I needed to know what he wanted. But I found that hilarious, because it's like, yeah, a lot of people, like, they think of free running. It's like, oh, free running is like getting from one point to another. Parkour, that's the abstract term that I don't know what means. That must be the flip stuff. So people get it confused. That's why we just need to like drop free running as a term. And I've been a proponent of that for a long time.
And that's a big takeaway from the talk, or Sebastien coming out and giving this history talk is just saying like where it came from, that he kind of feels like it was a mistake.
Yeah.
We didn't talk about art du déplacement. That's the thing, and that's like less mistake, because that almost like art du déplacement is kind of like all in, because what he says they were doing before is like parkour was part of it. Parkour with a C was part of it, but they were also doing like a bunch of physical training and other things, and like all together it was like art du déplacement.
Yeah. Well, okay, so let's say we get rid of the term free running.
Yeah.
What?
I think we've been part of that propaganda for a while.
Yeah, okay, but let's say as a culture we finally accept, okay, free running, free runner, it's not the term we want as like associating with our sport. What do we replace it with? Because there is a distinction between like people who are, there's a difference between Brody Pawson and Choke. The 17-year-old kid corking off of stuff and doing cork gaps versus Brody Pawson who's doing like big gaps and like speed climbing stuff, So there's a difference between those two things, but I do think that they fit under the same umbrella. Is that umbrella parkour? Or are they two separate umbrellas?